The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton as Private Jake Carver stood in line with 30 other fresh recruits. His worn boots, hand-me-down uniform, and quiet demeanor made him blend into the background like wallpaper. While other recruits boasted about their high school football achievements or family military traditions, Jake simply listened, his pale green eyes observing everything around him. Sergeant Mills paced in front of the formation, his weathered face scanning each face with the precision of a hawk hunting prey. His voice boomed across the parade ground as he began the morning inspection. Today marks the beginning of your transformation from soft civilians into United States Army soldiers. Some of you will excel. Some of you will barely survive. And some of you, he paused, his gaze briefly touching Jake before moving on, will simply disappear into the crowd. Jake had heard variations of this speech before. At 18, he had already lived in 7 different foster homes, attended 12 schools, and learned that survival meant staying invisible. His strategy had always been simple: keep your head down, follow orders, and never draw attention to yourself. It had worked for years, and he saw no reason to change now. The first week of basic training unfolded exactly as Jake expected. During physical training, he finished in the middle of the pack. Not fast enough to be noticed, not slow enough to be singled out. In weapons training, he demonstrated adequate marksmanship. Good enough to pass, not good enough to stand out. When drill instructors screamed at struggling recruits, Jake remained in the background, a ghost in camouflage. His bunkmate, Tommy Rodriguez from Texas, tried to strike up conversations during the limited downtime. "Man, you're like a monk or something," Tommy observed one evening as they cleaned their rifles. "Don't you ever want to, I don't know, prove yourself? Show them what you can do?" Jake's response was a non-committal shrug as he methodically cleaned each component of his weapon with practiced precision. "I'm here to learn and serve. That's enough." Tommy shook his head. "My dad always said the Army rewards those who step up, take initiative. You got skills, Carver. I can see it in how you handle equipment, how you watch everything. Why you hiding it?" The question lingered in Jake's mind longer than he cared to admit. Why was he hiding? The answer lay buried in years of disappointment and abandonment. Every time he had shown promise in foster care or school, expectations rose. And, when expectations rose, so did the potential for failure and rejection. It was safer to remain unremarkable. During the second week, the training intensified. The recruits faced obstacle courses, tactical exercises, and leadership challenges. Jake navigated each test with the same measured approach, competent but invisible. When his squad struggled with map reading during a navigation exercise, Jake quietly guided them in the right direction without taking credit. When equipment malfunctioned, he fixed it without fanfare. When fellow recruits needed help with drill movements, he demonstrated the correct technique during breaks, away from instructor oversight. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the platoon leader, began to notice patterns. Unlike the drill sergeants who focused on obvious performers and obvious problems, she observed the subtle dynamics within the group. She noticed how Jake's squad consistently performed slightly better than expected. She observed how equipment issues seemed to resolve themselves when Jake was nearby. She watched how other recruits unconsciously turned to him for guidance during uncertain moments. One evening, Lieutenant Chen reviewed performance reports in her office. Jake Carver's file was remarkably unremarkable. Average test scores, satisfactory ratings across all categories, no disciplinary issues, no commendations. Yet something about the consistency bothered her. In her 5 years of training recruits, she had learned that truly average soldiers were actually quite rare. Most recruits displayed clear strengths and weaknesses, peaks and valleys in their performance. Carver's perfectly flat line of mediocrity seemed almost intentional. The third week brought urban warfare training. Recruits learned to clear buildings, work in small teams, and make split-second tactical decisions. Jake found himself assigned to a squad with 3 of the more struggling recruits: Marcus Webb, a farm kid from Iowa who couldn't seem to grasp basic tactics; Lisa Park, a computer science student who excelled academically but froze under pressure; and David Kumar, whose enthusiasm often led to reckless mistakes. Sergeant Mills watched the squad assignments with satisfaction. By grouping weaker performers together, he expected to identify those who couldn't adapt to military standards. It was a harsh but effective method of separating potential soldiers from those who should return to civilian life. The first building clearing exercise went exactly as Sergeant Mills predicted. Marcus moved too slowly, Lisa hesitated at crucial moments, and David charged ahead without proper coordination. Their time was the worst of all squads, and their technique earned sharp criticism from instructors. That night, Jake found his squadmates dejected in the barracks. Marcus sat on his bunk, staring at a letter from home. "Maybe I should just quit," he muttered. "My dad always said I wasn't cut out for this kind of thing." Lisa nodded glumly. "I keep freezing up. It's like my brain stops working when things get intense." David, usually optimistic, seemed deflated. "And I keep rushing in like an idiot. I almost got us all killed in that last scenario." Jake listened to their self-recriminations while organizing his gear. For years, he had watched others struggle and fail while he remained safely in the middle. But something about their genuine desire to improve, their willingness to acknowledge mistakes, struck a chord he had tried to silence. Against his better judgment, Jake spoke up. "Tomorrow's exercise is in the same type of building. If you want, we could practice the movements tonight." The suggestion surprised them. Jake had been polite but distant since training began. Marcus looked up hopefully. "You'd help us?" "We're a squad," Jake replied simply. "We succeed or fail together." For the next 2 hours, Jake led them through detailed practice sessions in an unused barracks building. He broke down each movement, explained the tactical reasoning behind proper positioning, and helped them develop better communication signals. His explanations were clear, patient, and demonstrated a deep understanding of urban warfare principles that none of them had expected. Lisa was the first to notice. "Jake, how do you know all this? Did you study military tactics before enlisting?" Jake paused, realizing he had revealed more expertise than intended. "I read a lot," he said finally, which was true but far from complete. The reality was more complex. During his years in foster care, Jake had found refuge in military history, tactical manuals, and survival guides. Books were constant companions when people were not. He had absorbed knowledge not from any desire for military glory, but because understanding systems and strategies gave him a sense of control in an unpredictable world. The next morning's exercise proved the value of their night practice. Jake's squad moved through the building with improved coordination, better timing, and clearer communication. They didn't achieve the best time, but their improvement was dramatic enough to earn nods of approval from observing instructors. Lieutenant Chen watched the exercise with particular interest. She had expected Carver's squad to remain at the bottom of the rankings. Instead, they demonstrated significant improvement in just 24 hours. More importantly, she noticed how the squad naturally deferred to Carver for guidance, and how he provided it without seeking recognition. After the exercise, she approached Sergeant Mills. "What do you know about Private Carver's background?" Mills consulted his notes. "Foster kid from Ohio. No family military service. Decent grades in high school but nothing special. Enlisted straight after graduation. Why?" Something about his squad's sudden improvement seems unusual. Mills shrugged. "Maybe the weak ones finally started trying harder. It happens sometimes." But Lieutenant Chen wasn't satisfied with that explanation. That evening, she reviewed video footage of the training exercises. What she saw confirmed her suspicions. In every scenario, Carver positioned himself strategically, often in locations that provided the best oversight of the entire situation. His movements were economical and precise, suggesting advanced understanding of tactical positioning. Most tellingly, he consistently anticipated problems before they developed, making subtle adjustments that prevented his squad from making serious errors. She decided to test her theory. The next day's training would include a complex scenario involving hostage rescue, multiple entry points, and time pressure. Instead of random squad assignments, she would deliberately create challenging combinations to see how different soldiers adapted to leadership opportunities. Jake sensed the change immediately when Lieutenant Chen announced the new exercise parameters. The scenario was more complex than anything they had faced, and the squad assignments seemed intentionally difficult. He found himself grouped with some of the strongest performers: Sarah Martinez, who had scored highest on marksmanship tests, Alex Thompson, a former college wrestler who excelled at physical challenges, and Jennifer Walsh, whose strategic thinking had impressed instructors. Unlike his previous squad of struggling recruits, these soldiers didn't naturally look to him for guidance. They were confident, capable, and accustomed to taking initiative themselves. Jake's usual strategy of quiet support wouldn't work in this environment. The briefing revealed a scenario involving armed hostiles holding civilians in a multi-story office building. Multiple entry points required coordination, timing, and adaptability when initial plans inevitably changed. Each squad would be evaluated not just on completion time, but on tactical decision-making, team coordination, and mission effectiveness. As his squad gathered to plan their approach, Jake found himself in an unfamiliar position. Sarah immediately began outlining an aggressive frontal assault strategy. Alex suggested a coordinated breach from multiple angles. Jennifer proposed a more methodical floor-by-floor clearing operation. Each approach had merits, but Jake could see flaws in all three plans. Sarah's strategy risked civilian casualties. Alex's coordination requirements exceeded their current skill level. Jennifer's methodical approach would take too long, potentially allowing hostiles to escape or harm civilians. For several minutes, Jake listened to increasingly heated debates as his squadmates defended their preferred approaches. Time was running short, and they needed to begin the exercise soon. His usual strategy would be to support whichever plan gained consensus, making small adjustments to minimize obvious problems. Instead, Jake found himself speaking up with an authority that surprised even him. The building has 4 floors and 2 stairwells. If we assume hostiles are monitoring all entrances, a simultaneous breach gives away our positions immediately. But if we create a distraction at the main entrance while moving through service areas, we can reach upper floors undetected. His squadmates stopped arguing and turned their attention to him. Jake continued, his voice gaining confidence as he outlined a plan that combined elements of their individual approaches while addressing key tactical challenges. Sarah's right about speed being crucial, but we need to be surgical, not aggressive. Alex, your coordination idea works if we keep it simple: 2-person teams with preset rally points. Jennifer, we clear systematically, but we prioritize areas where civilians are most likely to be held. He began sketching a tactical diagram that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of building layout, sightlines, and movement patterns. His plan accounted for potential complications, included contingency options, and assigned roles based on each team member's demonstrated strengths. Sarah studied the diagram with growing respect. This is actually really good. How did you come up with this so quickly? Jake realized he was at a crossroads. He could deflect the question, return to his background role, and hope his momentary leadership went unnoticed. Or he could acknowledge what was becoming increasingly obvious: his attempts to remain invisible were failing because his knowledge and instincts were too pronounced to hide. I've studied a lot of military tactics, he admitted. And I can see how building layouts work, where problems are likely to develop. Alex nodded approvingly. Then, you should call the shots during the exercise. We'll follow your lead. The exercise that followed was unlike anything Jake had experienced in training. Instead of quietly supporting others while remaining in the background, he found himself actively directing squad movements, making real-time tactical decisions, and coordinating complex maneuvers under pressure. His squad moved through the building with precision that surprised observing instructors. They avoided obvious traps, adapted smoothly when initial plans required modification, and completed the hostage rescue scenario in record time without any simulated casualties. Lieutenant Chen watched the exercise with growing amazement. Carver's transformation from invisible mediocrity to tactical leadership was so dramatic it seemed almost impossible. Yet the video evidence was undeniable. His squad had performed with a level of coordination and tactical sophistication that exceeded expectations for basic training recruits. More importantly, she noticed how naturally the other strong-willed recruits had deferred to Carver's leadership. Sarah, Alex, and Jennifer were not easily impressed or quick to follow, yet they had responded to his guidance without hesitation or resentment. When the exercise concluded, Sergeant Mills approached Lieutenant Chen with unusual enthusiasm. "Did you see that? Carver's squad made the rest of them look like amateurs. Where the hell did that come from?" Lieutenant Chen studied Jake as he debriefed with his squad, deflecting their praise while offering suggestions for improvement. "I think we've been looking at Private Carver all wrong," she said thoughtfully. That evening, she requested Jake's complete file from the recruitment office. What she discovered added new dimensions to her growing understanding of the quiet recruit who had just demonstrated exceptional leadership capabilities. Jake's academic records revealed consistently high test scores despite frequent school changes. Teacher comments noted his intelligence and potential, but also described him as withdrawn and reluctant to participate in leadership activities. Psychological evaluations from foster care placements painted a picture of a highly capable young man who deliberately underperformed to avoid drawing attention that might lead to disappointment or abandonment. Most intriguing was a note from his final foster placement. The family had tried to encourage Jake to apply for military academy scholarships, believing his combination of intelligence, discipline, and integrity made him ideal officer material. Jake had refused, insisting he wanted to enlist as a regular soldier and serve without standing out. Lieutenant Chen began to understand the complex psychological patterns that had kept Jake invisible for years. He possessed natural leadership abilities, tactical intelligence, and genuine dedication to service, but his traumatic history had taught him that exceptional performance led to elevated expectations and eventual failure. The question now was how to help him overcome those psychological barriers without destroying the confidence he was slowly building. She decided to take an indirect approach. Instead of confronting Jake directly about his obvious capabilities, she would create situations that naturally required him to step into leadership roles while providing support that helped him succeed. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The next training phase would involve multi-day field exercises with minimal instructor supervision. Squads would face complex scenarios requiring sustained teamwork, problem-solving, and leadership under stress. Jake had no idea that his careful facade was crumbling, or that his performance had attracted attention from officers who were beginning to see his true potential. He returned to the barracks that evening believing he had successfully completed another training exercise without drawing unwanted attention. He was about to discover that sometimes, hiding in the shadows becomes impossible when your light is too bright to conceal. The field exercise began at dawn on Monday with a 72-hour simulation designed to test every skill the recruits had learned. Lieutenant Chen watched as transport trucks carried 8 squads to different positions across a vast training area that mimicked real combat environments. Each squad would face a series of escalating challenges with minimal outside support, forcing them to rely on their training and each other. Jake found himself assigned as the designated navigator for his squad, a role that seemed routine until he realized the deliberate complexity of their mission parameters. They were tasked with establishing communication with 3 separate objectives while avoiding simulated enemy patrols, crossing difficult terrain, and maintaining operational security throughout the exercise. His squad mates had changed since the building clearing exercise. Sarah Martinez no longer questioned his tactical suggestions, Alex Thompson actively sought his input on physical challenges, and Jennifer Walsh deferred to his strategic assessments. The shift made Jake uncomfortable, as it represented exactly the kind of attention he had spent years avoiding. "Carver, what's your read on this terrain?" Alex asked as they studied the topographical map during their first planning session. Jake examined the contour lines, elevation markers, and terrain features with practiced eyes. His years of studying military manuals had included extensive work on navigation and terrain analysis. "The direct route puts us in 3 potential ambush points," he explained, tracing alternative paths with his finger. "If we swing north and use this ridgeline for cover, we add 2 hours but avoid most obvious danger areas." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "And if we're compromised?" "Secondary routes here and here," Jake indicated on the map. "Plus rally points every 2 kilometers in case we get separated." Sarah watched him outline contingency plans with growing amazement. You think like a staff officer, not a basic training recruit. Where did you learn all this? The question hit Jake like a physical blow. Throughout his childhood, similar observations had led to raised expectations, additional responsibilities, and, ultimately, disappointment when he failed to maintain the elevated standards others imposed on him. His instinct was to deflect, minimize his knowledge, and return to safe mediocrity. But, surrounded by squadmates who had come to rely on his guidance, deflection seemed impossible. I read a lot of military history, he said finally. Tactics, strategy, famous battles. It's just interesting to me. The partial truth satisfied his squadmates, but Jake knew he was walking increasingly dangerous ground. Each demonstration of competence made it harder to maintain his carefully constructed facade of ordinariness. The first day of the exercise proceeded smoothly under Jake's quiet guidance. His squad successfully avoided 3 simulated enemy patrols, reached their first objective ahead of schedule, and established communications without detection. Other squads radioed reports of casualties, equipment failures, and mission delays, but Jake's team moved through the challenges with efficiency that drew notice from monitoring instructors. That evening, as they established a concealed camp in dense woods, Jake overheard radio chatter between exercise controllers that made his blood run cold. Squad 7 is performing significantly above expectations, one voice reported. Their navigation and tactical movements suggest advanced training or exceptional leadership. Copy that. Keep close observation on Squad 7. We want detailed analysis of their performance patterns. Jake realized his worst fears were materializing. By helping his squadmates succeed, he had drawn exactly the kind of attention he had spent his entire life avoiding. The urge to sabotage their performance, to make deliberate mistakes that would return them to comfortable mediocrity, was almost overwhelming. But, as he watched Sarah cleaning her weapon with newfound confidence, Alex studying the map with genuine engagement, and Jennifer planning their next day's movement with tactical awareness she hadn't possessed weeks earlier, Jake found himself unable to abandon them. The second day brought their most challenging test yet. Intelligence reports indicated a simulated enemy force had captured important documents and was moving through their operational area. Multiple squads would converge on the target location, but success required coordination between units that had never worked together. Jake's squad reached the rally point first, a clearing in dense forest where they were supposed to await additional units before beginning the final approach. As they established defensive positions, radio reports painted an increasingly grim picture. Squad 3 had suffered multiple casualties crossing open ground. Squad 5 had lost their radio operator and couldn't maintain communications. Squad 2 was pinned down by enemy fire and requesting immediate assistance. Of the 8 squads that had begun the exercise, only 4 remained combat effective. Alex monitored the radio traffic with growing frustration. This is falling apart. If we wait for the other squads to get organized, the enemy will be long gone. Jennifer agreed. But, our orders are to coordinate the assault with all available units. Going in alone violates mission parameters. Sarah looked to Jake, who had remained silent while studying the tactical situation. What do you think? Jake faced a moment that would define not just the exercise, but his entire military future. Following orders meant accepting likely mission failure while maintaining safe anonymity. Taking initiative meant assuming responsibility and accepting the consequences of both success and failure. Years of conditioning told him to follow orders, stay invisible, and let others take responsibility for difficult decisions. But, watching his squadmates look to him with genuine trust and confidence, Jake realized that hiding had become impossible. Whether he acknowledged it or not, he had already become their leader. The mission objective is recovering those documents, Jake said slowly. If we wait for the other squads to reorganize, we'll lose the opportunity. But if we go in alone and fail, we've abandoned our fellow soldiers. He paused, weighing options with careful consideration. There's a third choice. We support Squad 2, get them back in action, then coordinate a 2-squad assault on the objective. Alex frowned. That puts us at risk of getting pinned down too. Not if we approach from the opposite direction and create crossfire, Jake explained, sketching tactical positions in the dirt.
Squad 2 draws their attention while we flank from here.
Once we've eliminated the threat, both squads are combat effective for the main assault.
Jennifer studied his plan with approval.
It's risky, but it gives us the best chance of mission success while supporting our fellow soldiers.
Sarah nodded firmly. Let's do it. What followed was the most intense tactical action Jake had ever experienced.
Moving through dense forest while coordinating with a pinned-down unit required split-second decisions, precise timing, and absolute trust between squad members. Jake found himself naturally calling tactical movements, directing fire patterns, and adapting the plan in real time as situations changed. His squad mates responded to his orders without hesitation, executing complex maneuvers with precision that surprised even themselves. The flanking maneuver succeeded beyond expectations. Squad 2 was freed from their defensive position, the simulated enemy patrol was eliminated, and both squads were positioned for a coordinated assault on the main objective. But Jake's radio communications during the rescue operation had been monitored by exercise controllers, and his tactical competence was now impossible to ignore. Lieutenant Chen listened to recorded radio traffic with growing amazement as Carver demonstrated command presence and tactical sophistication that exceeded many commissioned officers.
Control, this is Squad 7 leader. Jake's voice came through clearly on the recordings. Squad 2 is combat effective. Recommend coordinated approach using Route Charlie with overwatch positions here and here. Estimated time to contact, 15 minutes.
The confidence, clarity, and tactical awareness in his communications represented a dramatic transformation from the invisible recruit who had tried to blend into the background just weeks earlier.
The final assault on the objective building went flawlessly.
Jake coordinated both squads with tactical skill that impressed monitoring officers, adapted seamlessly to unexpected complications, and achieved mission success with 0 casualties while other squads continued to struggle with basic coordination. When the exercise concluded, Jake's squad had not only completed all assigned objectives but had rescued fellow soldiers and demonstrated leadership that exceeded all expectations for basic training recruits.
Lieutenant Chen arrived at the conclusion site to personally debrief the participating squads.
As she listened to glowing reports about Squad 7's performance, she watched Jake attempting to deflect credit and minimize his role in their success. The whole squad worked together, Jake insisted when she asked about his leadership during the operation.
Everyone did their job. Sarah interrupted immediately. That's not true, ma'am.
Carver planned every movement, called every tactical decision, and kept us organized when everything went wrong. We would have failed without his leadership.
Alex nodded emphatically.
I've been in competitive situations my whole life, and I've never seen anyone think that fast under pressure. He saved Squad 2 and still completed our mission objectives. Jennifer added, his tactical planning was better than anything we learned in classroom instruction. It's like he could see the whole battlefield in his head. Lieutenant Chen observed Jake's discomfort with the praise and recognition. Despite his obvious capabilities, he seemed genuinely distressed by his squadmates' admiration and her obvious interest in his performance. That evening, she requested a private meeting with Jake in her temporary field office. As he sat across from her desk, she could see the anxiety in his posture and expression. Private Carver, I want to discuss your performance during this exercise, she began carefully.
Jake's response was immediate and defensive. I just followed orders and did my job, ma'am.
According to your squadmates, you planned and executed a tactical rescue operation, coordinated 2 squad movements, and demonstrated command abilities that exceed basic training standards.
They're exaggerating, ma'am. We all worked together. Lieutenant Chen studied his file while Jake waited nervously.
Your academic records indicate exceptional intelligence. Your foster care evaluations mention leadership potential.
Your squadmates consistently turn to you for guidance.
Yet you've spent weeks trying to appear average.
Jake's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Ma'am, I never wanted to stand out.
I just want to serve, do my job, and not cause problems for anyone.
Why?
The question was gentle but direct. For several long moments, Jake struggled with how to answer. Finally, words that had been buried for years began to surface.
Because when people notice you, they expect things from you. And, when you can't meet those expectations, they give up on you. It's better to be ordinary and reliable than exceptional and disappointing.
Lieutenant Chen began to understand the psychological wounds that had shaped Jake's approach to life.
What if those expectations were realistic? What if the people setting them actually wanted to help you succeed?
That's what they all said, Jake replied bitterly.
Foster families, teachers, coaches.
They all saw potential and promised support. But, when things got difficult or complicated, they all found reasons to move on to easier situations. The Army is different, Private Carver.
We don't give up on soldiers who show promise.
We invest in them, train them, and help them reach their potential.
Jake's skepticism was obvious. With respect, ma'am, everyone says that until reality gets complicated. Lieutenant Chen recognized that years of abandonment and disappointment couldn't be overcome with simple reassurance.
Jake's defensive mechanisms were deeply ingrained survival strategies that had protected him through childhood trauma.
I'm going to make you an offer, she said finally.
I want to recommend you for advanced leadership training.
Not because I expect you to be perfect, but because I believe you have genuine potential that could benefit both you and the soldiers you might someday lead. Jake's immediate response was panic.
Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I really just want to complete basic training and serve as a regular soldier. That would be a waste of your abilities and a disservice to future soldiers who could benefit from your leadership.
What if I'm not as capable as you think? What if I fail and let people down?
Lieutenant Chen leaned forward, her expression serious but kind.
Then, you'll learn from the failure and try again. That's what we do in the Army. We don't abandon soldiers who are willing to learn and grow.
Jake sat in silence, wrestling with fears that had controlled his life for years. The offer represented everything he had always wanted but never dared to pursue: recognition, opportunity, and the chance to use his abilities for meaningful purposes. But it also represented everything he feared most: elevated expectations, increased responsibility, and the potential for devastating failure in front of people who believed in him.
I need time to think about it, Jake said finally.
Of course.
But I want you to consider something.
You've already been leading, whether you acknowledge it or not. Your squad mates depend on you, trust you, and follow your guidance.
The only question is whether you'll accept responsibility for the leadership you're already providing.
As Jake left the meeting, his mind was in turmoil. For weeks, he had tried to remain invisible while unconsciously stepping into leadership roles. His carefully maintained facade had crumbled, revealing abilities that could no longer be hidden. The choice was no longer whether to lead or follow. The choice was whether to accept responsibility for the leadership he had already been providing and pursue the training that would make him more effective, or continue trying to hide abilities that were becoming increasingly obvious to everyone around him. That night, as he lay in his sleeping bag staring at stars through the forest canopy, Jake realized that his life was about to change in ways he had never imagined. The question was whether he would guide the change or simply react to it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to demonstrate or conceal his capabilities. But Jake was beginning to understand that hiding was no longer possible, and perhaps it was time to stop trying. The final 2 weeks of basic training took on a different character after the field exercise. Jake found himself caught between his ingrained desire to remain invisible and the impossible reality that his abilities were now widely recognized among both fellow recruits and instructors. Every training scenario seemed designed to test leadership potential, and Jake could no longer hide his tactical instincts without actively sabotaging his squad's performance. Lieutenant Chen implemented what she privately called graduated pressure, carefully structured situations that required Jake to exercise increasing levels of responsibility while providing support that helped him succeed. She understood that forcing him into leadership roles too quickly might trigger his defensive mechanisms and cause him to shut down completely. The transformation wasn't just in Jake's performance, but in how other recruits began to perceive him. Word had spread about Squad 7's exceptional field exercise results, and recruits from other squads began approaching Jake for advice on everything from equipment maintenance to tactical problems. Marcus Webb, the farm kid who had struggled early in training, was among the first to seek Jake's guidance. "Hey Carver, we're having trouble with the urban assault course. Our team keeps getting bogged down in the stairwells. I heard you guys figured out some techniques that work." Jake's initial instinct was to deflect and minimize his knowledge. But, looking at Marcus's genuine desire to improve, and remembering how it felt to struggle without support, Jake found himself offering detailed tactical advice. "The stairwells are kill zones if you approach them wrong," Jake explained, sketching movements on paper. "Instead of rushing up, use the corners for cover, move in pairs, and always have someone watching your back trail." Marcus listened intently, asking clarifying questions and taking notes. When his squad applied Jake's techniques during the next training session, their improvement was dramatic enough to earn praise from instructors. Similar interactions began occurring throughout the training company. Recruits saw Jake's input on navigation problems, equipment issues, and tactical challenges. Despite his discomfort with the attention, Jake found it difficult to refuse help to fellow soldiers who were genuinely struggling. Sergeant Mills observed these informal mentoring sessions with grudging approval. "That Carver kid is becoming a force multiplier," he mentioned to Lieutenant Chen during their weekly evaluation meeting. "Other recruits are performing better because he's sharing knowledge and techniques. It's unusual for basic training, but the overall impact is positive." Lieutenant Chen nodded, but she was more concerned with Jake's psychological adaptation to his emerging leadership role. During individual counseling sessions, she could see him struggling with the conflict between his survival instincts and his natural desire to help others succeed. "How are you feeling about the leadership training recommendation?" she asked during one of their meetings. Jake's response revealed his internal conflict. "I want to help people, ma'am. When I see fellow soldiers struggling with problems I know how to solve, it feels wrong to stay silent. But every time I help someone, more people start asking for guidance, and expectations keep rising. That's what happens when you're good at something important," Lieutenant Chen observed. "People notice, and they want to benefit from your knowledge. But what happens when I can't meet those expectations? What happens when I make a mistake and let people down?" Lieutenant Chen recognized the fear underlying his question. "Jake, leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about taking responsibility, making the best decisions you can with available information, and learning from mistakes when they happen. Easy to say, ma'am. Harder to live with when real people get hurt because of your failures." The depth of Jake's fear became more apparent as Lieutenant Chen learned additional details about his childhood experiences. His foster care file contained reports of a particularly devastating incident when he was 14. After showing academic promise and leadership potential in a school project, he had been selected for a prestigious summer program for gifted students. His foster family had been proud and supportive, speaking excitedly about his bright future. But the program had been academically intense and socially challenging for a boy with no stable family foundation. Jake had struggled with the competitive environment, failed to meet the elevated expectations, and been dismissed from the program early. His foster family's disappointment had been crushing, and within 6 months they had requested his transfer to another placement, citing compatibility issues. The experience had reinforced Jake's belief that exceptional performance led to unsustainable expectations and inevitable abandonment. It explained why he had spent years deliberately underperforming to avoid similar disappointments. Understanding this background, Lieutenant Chen realized that traditional approaches to leadership development wouldn't work with Jake. He needed to experience success gradually, with adequate support and realistic expectations, to rebuild trust in his own abilities and in the people who might depend on him. She decided to create a structured mentoring opportunity that would allow Jake to exercise leadership in a controlled environment while building confidence through successful experiences. The opportunity came through an unusual request from the base education office. A group of high school students from the local community were scheduled to visit Fort Braxton for a military career orientation program. The education officer needed experienced soldiers to guide small groups of students through training demonstrations and answer questions about military service. Lieutenant Chen recommended Jake for the program, framing it as an opportunity to represent the Army positively rather than as a leadership test. Jake agreed reluctantly, believing it would be a routine public relations assignment. The morning of the school visit, Jake found himself assigned to guide 8 high school students, ranging from confident seniors considering military academies to uncertain sophomores exploring career options. His initial plan was to follow the standard tour route and provide basic information without drawing attention to himself. But the students' questions quickly moved beyond standard tour content. They wanted to understand what military training actually involved, how soldiers made tactical decisions under pressure, and whether the skills they were learning in school would be relevant to military service. Sarah Martinez and Alex Thompson, who had volunteered for the same program, watched with amazement as Jake transformed from reluctant guide to engaging instructor. When students asked about urban warfare training, he provided detailed explanations supported by practical demonstrations. When they wondered about navigation techniques, he taught them to read topographical maps using actual examples from their training area. One student, a 17-year-old named Kevin, seemed particularly interested in tactical planning. How do you decide which approach to take when you don't know what you're facing? Jake's response revealed the depth of his tactical thinking. You gather all available intelligence, identify your objectives, assess potential risks, and develop multiple options with contingency plans. Then, you choose the approach that gives you the best chance of success while minimizing danger to your people. But what if you choose wrong? Kevin pressed. The question struck at Jake's deepest fears, but, surrounded by curious students genuinely interested in learning, he found himself giving an honest answer. Then, you adapt quickly, learn from the mistake, and make better decisions next time. The key is making the best choice you can with the information you have, not trying to make perfect choices with information you don't have. Sarah later told Lieutenant Chen, "I've never seen Jake so comfortable explaining tactical concepts. It was like watching a teacher who genuinely loved his subject." Alex added, "The students were completely engaged. They kept asking follow-up questions and taking notes. By the end, they were calling him Sergeant Carver and asking if he'd be their instructor if they enlisted." Lieutenant Chen reviewed the feedback forms submitted by the visiting students. Multiple comments mentioned the knowledgeable soldier who explained tactics and the instructor who made military strategy understandable. Several students specifically requested information about programs that might allow them to work with Sergeant Carver in the future. More importantly, Jake's own evaluation of the experience was positive. They asked good questions and really wanted to understand military thinking, he told Lieutenant Chen. It felt good to help them see how everything we learned fits together into practical applications. How did it feel to be in an instructional role, she asked. Jake considered the question carefully. Different than I expected. When you're teaching people who want to learn, and you know the subject well, it feels natural. Like you're helping them discover things they can use. Lieutenant Chen recognized this as a breakthrough moment. Jake had experienced successful leadership in a teaching context, where his knowledge and communication skills had been appreciated rather than seen as threatening or intimidating. She decided to build on this success by creating additional opportunities for Jake to exercise leadership through mentoring and instruction rather than direct command authority. The next opportunity came when several recruits from other platoons requested help with the final comprehensive examination. The test covered everything learned during basic training, from military history to tactical principles, and several soldiers were struggling with the complexity. Jake found himself running informal study sessions in the evenings, breaking down complex concepts into understandable components and helping fellow soldiers make connections between different aspects of their training. Tommy Rodriguez, his original bunkmate, attended one of these sessions and was amazed by Jake's teaching ability. "Man, you should be an instructor, not a regular soldier. You make this stuff clearer than some of the sergeants do." The comment struck Jake as both flattering and terrifying. Teaching and instructing were forms of leadership that put him in positions of authority and responsibility. If students failed their examinations after receiving his guidance, he would bear some responsibility for their failure. But watching struggling soldiers gain confidence and understanding through his explanations provided a satisfaction Jake had never experienced. For the first time, his knowledge and abilities were being used to help others succeed rather than to protect himself from notice. The final examination results reinforced the value of Jake's informal instruction. Every soldier who had attended his study sessions passed with scores above the company average. More significantly, several soldiers who had been at risk of failing basic training achieved passing scores that allowed them to graduate and continue their military careers.
Sergeant Mills reviewed the examination statistics with surprise. "Carver's been running study groups? How did I miss that?" Lieutenant Chen smiled. He didn't announce it or ask for permission. He just saw fellow soldiers who needed help and provided it. "Sounds like officer material to me." "That's what I've been telling him." But he's not ready to hear it yet. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the base communications center. A situation had developed during a routine training exercise that required immediate command attention. 2 squads from different companies had become lost during a night navigation exercise. Poor weather had disrupted radio communications, and both squads had missed their scheduled check-in times. Search and rescue protocols had been activated, but the extensive training area and limited visibility were complicating recovery efforts. Colonel Harrison, the base commander, had been briefed on the situation and was personally overseeing the search operation. Multiple teams were deployed across the training area, but coordinating the search required someone with intimate knowledge of the terrain and tactical movement patterns. Lieutenant Chen realized that Jake possessed exactly the combination of knowledge and skills needed for the search operation. His months of studying maps, his tactical understanding, and his ability to think like a lost soldier might prove crucial in locating the missing squads. But recommending a basic training recruit for such a critical operation would be unprecedented and potentially career-ending if things went wrong. As she weighed the decision, reports came in that weather conditions were worsening and the missing soldiers were now 6 hours overdue. Standard search patterns had failed to locate either squad, and command was beginning to consider the possibility of serious injuries or equipment failures. Lieutenant Chen made a decision that would change everything. She approached the communications center and requested permission to speak with Colonel Harrison directly. "Sir, I have a recommendation for the search operation," she began carefully. "Private Carver from my training company has extensive knowledge of the terrain and exceptional tactical thinking. He might be able to provide insights that could help locate the missing squads." Colonel Harrison's response was skeptical. "You want to use a basic training recruit for a search and rescue operation?" "Sir, I believe his knowledge and analytical abilities could prove valuable. He's demonstrated exceptional understanding of terrain navigation and tactical movement patterns." There was a long pause before Colonel Harrison responded. "Bring him to the command center." "But, Lieutenant, if this recommendation proves to be a waste of time during a critical operation, you'll be answering some difficult questions." As Lieutenant Chen went to find Jake, she realized she was about to test not only his abilities but also her own judgment about his potential. Everything she believed about his capabilities was about to be put to the ultimate test. Jake was reviewing equipment in the barracks when Lieutenant Chen found him. "Private Carver, I need you to come with me immediately. There's an emergency situation where your knowledge might be helpful." As they walked quickly toward the command center, Jake felt familiar anxiety rising. Emergency situations requiring his knowledge sounded exactly like the kind of elevated expectations and critical responsibilities he had spent years avoiding. "Ma'am, what kind of emergency? What do they need me for?" "2 squads are missing during a night navigation exercise. Command needs help figuring out where they might be and how to reach them safely." Jake stopped walking. "Ma'am, I'm just a basic training recruit. Surely there are experienced personnel better qualified for search operations." Lieutenant Chen turned to face him directly. "Jake, those missing soldiers are fellow recruits just like the people you've been helping with their studies. They're lost, potentially injured, and in danger. Command needs every possible resource to bring them home safely." The appeal to his desire to help fellow soldiers was effective, but Jake still felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. "What if I can't help? What if my suggestions waste valuable time when people are in real danger? Then, we'll have tried everything possible." "But I believe your knowledge and analytical abilities could make the difference between success and failure in this operation." As they approached the command center,
Jake realized he was about to face the ultimate test of his abilities under circumstances where failure could have life or death consequences. Everything he had learned, every tactical principle he had studied, every leadership skill he had reluctantly developed would be put to immediate practical use. The moment that would define his military future was about to arrive, and there would be no opportunity to hide in the background or deflect responsibility to others. The command center buzzed with controlled urgency as Jake followed Lieutenant Chen through the entrance. Multiple radio operators coordinated with search teams spread across the training area while officers studied large-scale maps marked with grid coordinates and search sectors. The weight of a real emergency operation was unlike anything Jake had experienced during training exercises. Colonel Harrison stood at the center of the operation, a tall man with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. When Lieutenant Chen approached with Jake, the colonel's expression showed skepticism mixed with desperate willingness to try any promising option. "Sir, this is Private Carver," Lieutenant Chen announced. "He has extensive knowledge of the training area terrain and tactical movement patterns." Colonel Harrison studied Jake with sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything from his posture to his expression in seconds. "Private, Lieutenant Chen believes you might have insights that could help us locate 2 missing squads. 8 soldiers have been out of communication for over 6 hours in deteriorating weather conditions." Jake felt the familiar surge of panic that came with elevated expectations and critical responsibility. 8 lives potentially depending on his knowledge and judgment represented exactly the kind of pressure he had spent years avoiding. His instinct was to deflect, minimize his abilities, and suggest that experienced personnel would be better qualified. But, looking at the maps showing vast search areas and listening to radio reports of unsuccessful search efforts, Jake realized that standard approaches were failing. If his knowledge could help locate fellow soldiers in danger, his personal comfort was irrelevant. "Sir, may I see the maps showing their planned routes and the areas already searched?" Colonel Harrison gestured toward a large table covered with topographical maps marked with colored overlays. Squad Alpha was supposed to follow this route, he indicated with red markings, and Squad Bravo was assigned this path, marked in blue. Both squads missed their scheduled check-in at 2100 hours. "We've searched these areas," he pointed to sections marked with green overlays, without finding any trace of either squad. Jake studied the maps with intense concentration, absorbing terrain features, elevation changes, and potential navigation challenges. His years of studying military tactics and navigation had included extensive analysis of how soldiers moved through different types of terrain, where they were likely to make mistakes, and how environmental factors influenced tactical decisions. After several minutes of silent analysis, Jake began to see patterns that might explain the missing squad situations. "Sir, both planned routes cross this ridge system," Jake pointed to elevation lines on the map. "In good weather, the routes are straightforward. But, if visibility dropped and they lost GPS signals, there are several places where natural terrain features could channel them into unplanned directions." Colonel Harrison leaned forward with interest. "Explain." Jake traced his finger along the mapped terrain. "Here, and here, the ridgelines create natural corridors that lead away from the planned routes. If squads were navigating by compass during poor visibility, these terrain features would feel like the correct path but actually divert them into these valleys." Major Collins, the search operation coordinator, studied Jake's analysis skeptically. "Our search teams have been through those valleys. No sign of either squad." "Sir, may I ask what search patterns were used?" Major Collins consulted his notes. "Standard grid search along the valley floors and main trails." Jake hesitated, knowing his next observation might sound presumptuous coming from a basic training recruit. "Sir, if squads realized they were off course, they might have tried to reach high ground for better radio contact and visibility. Instead of staying in the valleys, they could have moved up to these elevated positions." He indicated several high points that offered commanding views but were not easily accessible by standard trails. These locations would make sense for lost squads trying to establish communications and get their bearings. Colonel Harrison exchanged glances with Major Collins. "Those areas haven't been searched because they're difficult to reach and seemed unlikely locations for squads following established routes. But, sir," Jake continued, gaining confidence as he explained his reasoning. Lost squads don't follow established routes. They follow terrain features that seem logical when you're disoriented and trying to solve navigation problems.
Lieutenant Chen watched Jake's transformation with amazement.
Despite his obvious nervousness about the high-stakes situation, he was thinking clearly and communicating complex tactical analysis with precision and clarity.
Colonel Harrison made a decision. Major Collins, redirect search teams to these elevated positions.
Use helicopter support if necessary to reach difficult terrain. As radio orders went out to reposition search teams, Jake continued studying the maps, looking for additional insights that might help locate the missing soldiers. "Sir, there's another possibility," Jake said quietly. "If both squads recognized they were lost around the same time, and both tried to reach high ground for communications, they might have converged in this area." He pointed to a plateau that was accessible from multiple directions.
"Why that location specifically?" Colonel Harrison asked.
"It's the highest point visible from both planned routes. If I were lost in this terrain and trying to establish radio contact, that's where I would go."
And if both squads had the same idea? Major Collins was already directing helicopter assets toward the identified location. Chopper 2, proceed to grid reference 347 to 891. Look for signs of personnel or temporary shelters.
The next 20 minutes felt like hours as Jake stood in the command center, acutely aware that his analysis was directing a major search operation. If he was wrong, valuable time and resources would be wasted while 8 soldiers remained in danger. Radio chatter filled the command center as search teams moved toward the locations Jake had identified. Weather reports indicated worsening conditions, making the operation increasingly urgent and dangerous for both missing soldiers and search teams.
"Command, this is Chopper 2, came the voice that would change everything. I have visual contact with what appears to be a shelter and signal mirror on the elevated position. Investigating further."
Colonel Harrison's expression remained carefully neutral, but Jake could see the relief in his eyes.
"Copy, Chopper 2.
Maintain visual contact and report personnel status."
Command, confirmed. I have 8 personnel in good condition at grid reference 347 to 891. Repeat, 8 personnel, all conscious and mobile, requesting extraction.
The command center erupted in controlled celebration as radio operators coordinated extraction procedures and medical evaluation protocols.
Colonel Harrison turned to Jake with an expression that combined gratitude, respect, and amazement.
"Private Carver, your analysis was exactly correct.
Both squads had reached the elevated position and established a shelter while waiting for weather to clear." Jake felt a mixture of relief and disbelief.
His theoretical knowledge and tactical analysis had translated into successful real-world results when lives were at stake. For the first time, his abilities had been used for their intended purpose, helping fellow soldiers survive and succeed. But Colonel Harrison wasn't finished. "Lieutenant Chen, I want a full report on Private Carver's background, training, and performance evaluations. That level of tactical analysis doesn't come from basic training alone." As extraction helicopters departed to retrieve the missing squads, Colonel Harrison requested a private meeting with Jake in his office. Walking through the command building, Jake felt the surreal quality of the situation. Hours earlier, he had been a deliberately invisible basic training recruit. Now he was being personally debriefed by the base commander after successfully directing a search and rescue operation. Colonel Harrison's office reflected his long military career, with commendations, unit photographs, and mementos from deployments around the world. He gestured for Jake to take a seat across from his desk before settling into his chair with the deliberate manner of someone preparing for an important conversation.
"Private Carver, I've reviewed your file," Colonel Harrison began.
"Academic records indicate exceptional intelligence, but no formal military education or training beyond basic requirements. Yet tonight you demonstrated tactical analysis capabilities that exceed many commissioned officers.
I want to understand how that's possible."
Jake found himself facing the same question that had haunted him throughout training: how to explain knowledge and abilities that seemed to exceed his background and experience. But, sitting across from a colonel who had just witnessed the practical value of his capabilities, deflection and minimization seemed both impossible and disrespectful. "Sir, I've studied military history, tactics, and strategy extensively since I was young. Books were constant companions during foster care, and military subjects were particularly interesting to me. I learned to think systematically about tactical problems, terrain analysis, and operational planning."
Self-taught? Colonel Harrison's tone suggested both surprise and respect.
"Yes, sir. I read everything I could find about famous battles, tactical innovations, and strategic principles. I studied topographical maps, learned navigation techniques, and tried to understand how successful military leaders made decisions under pressure." Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, processing this information.
Why didn't you pursue officer training or military academy appointment?
Your combination of intelligence and tactical knowledge suggests you could have qualified for advanced programs. The question touched Jake's deepest fears about expectations and failure. "Sir, I wanted to serve without drawing attention or creating elevated expectations that I might not be able to meet."
Because of your foster care background? Jake was surprised by the colonel's insight.
"Yes, sir. Experience taught me that exceptional performance leads to increased expectations, and, when you fail to meet those expectations, people give up on you. It seems safer to serve competently without standing out." Colonel Harrison studied Jake with the analytical look of someone who had spent decades evaluating soldier potential. "Private, tonight you didn't just meet expectations.
You exceeded them under life-or-death pressure.
8 soldiers are safe because of your knowledge and analytical abilities."
"I got lucky, sir."
"The terrain analysis happened to be correct. Luck had nothing to do with it. You applied systematic knowledge to a complex problem and reached accurate conclusions under intense pressure."
That's exactly what we need from military leaders.
Jake felt familiar anxiety rising as the conversation moved toward leadership and elevated responsibilities. "Sir, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm not sure I'm ready for leadership roles that could affect other people's lives." Colonel Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious but understanding. "Jake, leadership isn't about being ready. It's about accepting responsibility when the situation requires it.
Tonight, you demonstrated leadership by providing knowledge that saved lives.
The question isn't whether you're ready, but whether you're willing to develop the skills that match your natural abilities."
What do you mean, sir? I'm recommending you for officer candidate school.
Your combination of tactical intelligence, analytical abilities, and genuine concern for fellow soldiers makes you ideal officer material.
Jake's immediate reaction was panic.
Officer training represented everything he had spent years avoiding: elevated expectations, leadership responsibility, and the potential for catastrophic failure in positions where mistakes could cost lives. "Sir, I don't think I'm qualified for officer training.
I'm just a basic training recruit with no formal military education."
You're a recruit who successfully directed a search and rescue operation that experienced officers couldn't solve. Your informal military education appears to be more comprehensive than many formal programs. Colonel Harrison pulled out a folder and placed it on his desk. "I'm also recommending you for accelerated promotion and specialized tactical training. The Army needs soldiers who can think strategically while maintaining genuine concern for the people they lead."
What if I fail? What if I can't meet the standards or make mistakes that hurt people under my command?
Colonel Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Then, you'll learn from those mistakes and become a better leader. Jake, failure isn't the end of development, it's part of the process. What matters is your willingness to accept responsibility and keep improving." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door.
Lieutenant Chen entered with a report about the extracted squads.
"Sir, all 8 personnel have been medically evaluated and cleared."
Squad leaders report they became disoriented when weather reduced visibility and GPS signals became unreliable.
They made the decision to reach high ground and wait for conditions to improve, exactly as Private Carver predicted.
Colonel Harrison nodded.
Their tactical decision was sound, and our analysis was accurate thanks to Private Carver's insights.
Lieutenant Chen smiled at Jake.
The squad leaders specifically asked to thank whoever provided the analysis that led to their quick location. They said the elevated position you identified was exactly where they decided to establish their shelter.
As Lieutenant Chen left, Colonel Harrison returned his attention to Jake. Those 8 soldiers want to thank you personally.
Your knowledge and analysis directly contributed to their safe recovery. Jake felt the impact of the colonel's words. For the first time in his life, his abilities had been used to help others in a genuinely meaningful way. The theoretical knowledge he had accumulated through years of study had translated into practical results that saved lives and reunited soldiers with their families.
Sir, if you really believe I could be effective as an officer, I'm willing to try. But I want to understand what would be expected and what support would be available.
Colonel Harrison opened the folder on his desk. Officer Candidate School would provide formal tactical education, leadership training, and practical experience in positions of increasing responsibility.
You'd be supported by experienced officers who understand the challenges of transitioning from enlisted to commissioned service. And if I struggle with the leadership aspects?
Then, you'll receive additional mentoring and training until you develop the skills you need. The Army invests heavily in officer development because we need leaders who combine tactical competence with genuine concern for their soldiers' welfare. Jake realized he was at a crossroads that would define his entire military career and, possibly, his life. He could continue trying to remain invisible, serving competently but without fully utilizing his abilities. Or he could accept the challenge of developing leadership skills that matched his tactical knowledge and analytical capabilities. Looking at Colonel Harrison's confident expression and remembering the relief in the voices of the extracted soldiers, Jake made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier.
Sir, I accept your recommendation for Officer Candidate School. I want to develop the skills that will make me an effective leader for soldiers like the ones we helped tonight.
Colonel Harrison smiled with genuine satisfaction.
Outstanding. Lieutenant Chen will coordinate the paperwork and transition procedures. You'll complete basic training with your current class, then begin OCS next month.
As Jake left the colonel's office, his mind was still processing the dramatic changes of the past few hours. He had entered the command center as a basic training recruit trying to help with an emergency situation. He was leaving as a future officer candidate who had successfully demonstrated tactical abilities under life or death pressure. The next morning, word of the successful search operation had spread throughout the training company. Jake found himself surrounded by fellow recruits who wanted to hear about the experience and congratulate him on his role in locating the missing squads. Sarah Martinez was among the first to approach him. "Carver, I heard you basically solved the whole search operation."
"That's incredible." Alex Thompson added, "And Colonel Harrison personally recommended you for officer training? That's like winning the military lottery."
Jake's initial reaction was familiar discomfort with the attention and praise. But, looking at his squadmates' genuine admiration and remembering the successful outcome of the search operation, he realized that hiding his abilities was no longer possible or appropriate. "I got lucky with the terrain analysis," Jake said. "But, more importantly, 8 soldiers are safe and back with their units." Tommy Rodriguez, his original bunkmate, offered a different perspective.
"Man, it wasn't luck.
You've been studying this stuff for years, and, when it mattered, you knew exactly what to do."
"That's not luck, that's preparation meeting opportunity." Lieutenant Chen arrived to brief Jake on his transition to Officer Candidate School. "Your orders have been processed, and you'll report to OCS next month. Congratulations, future Lieutenant Carver."
As Jake processed the reality of his upcoming transition, he realized that his years of hiding exceptional abilities had finally ended. The search operation had demonstrated that his knowledge and analytical skills could make genuine differences in life or death situations. More importantly, he had experienced successful leadership under extreme pressure without the devastating failure he had always feared. The 8 soldiers who were safely reunited with their families represented proof that his abilities could be used to help others rather than simply protect himself. Standing in the barracks that had been his home for months of basic training, Jake understood that his military career was beginning rather than ending. The frightened foster kid who had enlisted to serve invisibly was becoming a leader who could help fellow soldiers survive and succeed.
The transformation wasn't complete.
Officer training would bring new challenges, additional responsibilities, and opportunities for both success and failure. But Jake no longer feared those challenges the way he once had. Lieutenant Chen had been right weeks earlier when she observed that he was already leading whether he acknowledged it or not. The search operation had simply made that leadership official and directed it toward its proper purpose. As he prepared for the final weeks of basic training and the beginning of officer candidate school, Jake realized that sometimes the best way to remain invisible is to shine so brightly that hiding becomes impossible. The overlooked recruit had finally stepped out of the shadows, and the army would be better for his willingness to lead. Months later, when newly commissioned Second Lieutenant Jake Carver took command of his first platoon, his soldiers would never know that their confident, capable leader had once been a recruit who tried desperately to avoid notice. They would see only a young officer who understood tactics, cared about his soldiers, and made decisions with the calm competence that saved lives and accomplished missions. But Jake would always remember the night when Colonel Harrison's call to call the general had changed everything, proving that sometimes the most important battles are won not by the loudest voices, but by the quietest competence that finally finds its proper place.